You're listening to Insights from the Conference Board.
Hello, my name is John Metselaar, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Insights, a series which helps senior executives address challenges and stay informed about current issues ahead of market trends. The series is brought to you by the Conference Board. Today, I have an immense pleasure to be sitting down with Alexander van Riet, until 17 days ago, CEO of My Dubai, the fastest growing bottled water company in the Gulf region. Before moving to the UAE, Alexander worked in multinationals like Air Products, Gemini Consulting, and Avery Dennison. As it happens, Alexander is a fellow Dutchman, and he holds an MBA from the Rotterdam School of Management. And I'll leave the introduction to this and then ask Alexander himself to say a few words about Alexander and explain to us how he was able to go and move from the canals and the rain of the Netherlands, it's been raining for 3 weeks, Alexander, the last few into hot and sunny Dubai, and become the CEO of My Dubai, and have taken that company to such amazing results. Alexander, thank you for joining us. Pleasure to be talking again with you. And why don't you say a few words about your journey of life?
All right. Thanks, John, for that very kind introduction. Indeed, as a fellow Dutchman, I guess I left Holland when I was 13 and then moved around different parts of the world, from Belgium, I think where you're based right now, over via England to the United States. And I moved to many different countries afterwards. Most of my life, I've been into the business-to-business element of it. Was very in aspects in the label business for a large part, and then also some strategic consulting. And then really in the largest part, I was running in a company that produced labels. It was a group that had 22 factories worldwide. And from there, I was able to take some leave, traveled around the world for a year with my family, wrote a book about it, and then settled down in Dubai. First as a consultant, and then I guess I started to apply labels because, as you mentioned, it was for a bottled water company that I've been running, or that I've been affiliated with for the last 7 years, going from industry business to a fast-moving consumer goods company, maybe even hyper-moving goods, because water, of course, moves quite fast. So that's in a nutshell a little bit my background.
Yeah, that sounds like an exciting life. Never a boring day, I would imagine.
Correct.
Hey, Alex and I talked yesterday about how to structure the conversation. We felt that many of the podcasts are heavy on talk, but light on insights. And so, how do we structure the conversation a bit? And I suggested that maybe we take my generative leadership framework, which I developed and teach to executive MBAs and to many things beyond, which really has two pillars. It's all about what leaders do, and then it goes on to talk about who leaders are, or rather should be. And so we thought, hey, why don't we take those two pillars, and they have 3 levels each, and we go and structure the conversation along those pillars and those levels. So let's start with what leaders do. And there really are 3 levels. They are envisioning. That's not enough. Then it's enabling to execute. That's not enough. And then it's engaging and empowering the organization to get your people on fire to go and actually do the work. So let's start with the highest level, which is envisioning. Leadership is about setting direction, right? It's about defining your purpose, living your purpose. It's about setting, challenging goals, objectives, and ultimately translating that into strategies. So, if you take that box, if you take that vector, Alexander, what's been your approach at My Dubai that, frankly, allowed it to become such a star?
Yeah, and let me, thanks for that. Yeah, let me just maybe start off by a quick word about My Dubai so people know what it is. We're effectively a bottled water company. So the bottled water that you might buy in your supermarkets, your hypermarkets, but even the 5-gallon, the big glooks that's on the water coolers that you see in offices, but all the way down to cups, small cups with water that, for instance, that you see on the Emirates Airlines. Those are the type of products that we used to make, or that I used to be involved in. And we did that from Dubai. My Dubai, actually, my is the Arabic word for water. So my Dubai actually stands for Dubai Water. And the company only started in 2013. So, and when I took over, we were at about 5% market share. And when I left, around 20% or over 20%. And one of the key things, of course, is, how do you do that, or what is your big goal? And I think I was blessed being in Dubai, because everybody knows Dubai. It is sets incredible, as they say, BHAGs, your big, hairy, audacious goals. You think of the Burj Khalifa, you think of the Burj Al Arab, the Palm. They think big, and I think that's an important part of strategy, is giving a view and taking a stand and say, this is what we do, and we do it better than anybody else. And that certainly, even in the water business, we were able to do that in two ways. I think there was an issue of how do we market ourselves. So when you went into the aisles in the supermarkets, water is typically blue and green, with little palm trees on it, or oases. And in our case, our bottle design was completely unique, and we were bright red, which was very outstanding on the shelf, and that really helped pop out. And then the other part is through fantastic sponsorship of the board. They were also bold enough to say, we want this entire factory be solar powered. So although we supply over 20% of this market, the entire factory, from computers to lights to all the equipment in there, was solar powered. And that is I think it was the second largest rooftop installation in the world. And wow, that is cool. From a strategy perspective, a big bet they made. But that's, I think, where strategy comes in. You have to have that big flagship thing that you believe in and that you do.
So fundamentally, what I then pick up as insight is big, hairy, audacious goals, be ambitious, and then turn it into differentiating strategies. And it's interesting because the differentiating strategies both are in how you execute in terms of your color, but also then in terms of how you innovate in your process through your solar panels.
Absolutely,
second in the world. That's quite amazing. Wow, good, great start. So then that's important, right? Again, it's about setting directions, it's about ambitious, it's about setting expectations as well to your people, but it's not enough. Then you need to make sure that you translate those strategies into execution. What has been your focus to enable your people to execute with such excellence and with such great results?
Yeah, so different companies are at different stages in life. I guess what for us the critical part was, when I joined them 7 years ago, they were 2-3-year-old company. And you can imagine the way that you run an organization of, let's say, 500 people to almost 1,500 people right now is totally different. So we went through this explosive growth. And you need to be able that your processes, your systems, your people, everything grows with that. Ourselves, we actually used a tool that you might be familiar with, because I think it came out of the Procter & Gamble background somewhere, OGSM, where we took the overall objectives of the company where we wanted to be. And we were very bold about it right from the start. We wanted to be the number one bottled water company in the UAE, in the Emirates. And then we broke that down into, okay, if you want to do that, how do you do that? What needs to happen in order to get there? And that has to do with geographic expansion, that has to be with channel expansion, that has to be with where do you play and how do you win. So a lot of what we've done is create that structure and that cascade down, which broke the overall objective into subunits for the different departments. And we followed that up rigorously, because sometimes you have these plans and they stay in a drawer somewhere with dust on it. And in our case, it was a monthly follow-up for the direct lines, and for the functions on a quarterly basis. We take a look at, guys, are we hitting our job objectives? Are we having the right things in place, the right resources in place, the right activities in place to get to those goals? And it's very important to get that engagement and to understand, or let people understand what they need to do in order to get to that, as you also mentioned, that big audacious goal.
So OGSM, by the way, for the listeners, indeed, it's funny to hear you as a proctoid. I used to work at P&G for many years. Stands for objectives, goals, strategies, and measures. And then you also sort of rattled off where to play and how to win. These are the fundamental areas of top parts, elements, I should say, of P&G strategy approach. And then, indeed, strategy is only effective once you can turn it into execution, right? Once you go and implement your strategies, and so diligent tracking and learning has to be part of that as well.
Yeah.
Interesting. This has been already, a proven approach since I was at P&G. When did I join? Probably 35 years ago. And you have reapplied that so successfully in such a young company. That's a very interesting story to hear you talk, hear you
Yeah,
tell.
it's something. I think there's different ways of doing it. A lot of it, you see in other areas as well, where people do plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, review. But the entire discipline, the military works that way as well. You have your objective, you have your strategic goal. Chew it up, or how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You chew it up in smaller bits, and then you make sure you execute against that, and you execute rigorously. And that's how you how you get successful. It's something
Yeah.
that needs rigorous follow up, and yes, everything goes faster and faster, but the wheel just turns quicker. You still have to go through the same and learn from it. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. It is about getting the processes right, getting the discipline in there, and make sure that your systems are there to help you, and so that you get to that famous quote again from a P&G'er. One of our CEOs used to say, "Execution is the only strategy the consumer ever sees." John, I still remember that vividly. So okay, that's cool. And then we move to the third part. So we talked envisioning, we talked enabling to execute, and then in the end, it's business is a human endeavor, right? So that's where the engaging and empowering comes in, and I'm particularly interested in that field for two reasons. One is I think many leaders are sort of comfortable with the envisioning, and the enabling to execute, but then when it gets to people and emotions, it's getting a bit more challenging.
Yes.
And then then secondly, it's you as a Dutchman operating in a very different culture, right? And frankly, having operated in many different cultures. So what have you learned and applied within that third? I don't like the word box, within the third vector.
Yeah, I think that ultimately it comes down, John, to people. If I take a look at the factory that we have here, it's absolutely one of the best invested water companies in the world, because the finances was there. So our machines, our bottling lines are French or German. Our distribution systems is Swiss and Swedish. The trucks that we drive are Mitsubishi. But if you think about it, anybody that has money can buy that, right? So ultimately, what I always say to people, it's not about the equipment. It is about the people that make the difference, because we were wildly successful, but other people, if you had enough money, you could buy the same equipment and make it happen. So the important part is, how do you motivate a team? How do you get people to work together and then make all these assets work for you? And I've seen fantastic assets, but if you don't have the right people in place, it goes really belly up. Whereas I've seen people actually working with equipment that wasn't so great, but the team was super motivated. They knew what they were doing, and they squeezed everything out of the assets that they could. So one of the key things, really, if it's not the ultimate, I rather have the right team and older assets, if you will, than the brand new assets, but a team that doesn't work. Because the organization, how you organize, how you get people to work together, that is really, I think, where great companies distinguish themselves from the middle of the road companies.
And what have you done as leader? How do you express that? What have you focused on within your company? How do you bring this to life?
Well, I think it probably goes a lot to what you were saying before about there's the things you do, and it is who you are as a person, right? And there's probably a bridge to that. But I think in first instance is you have that clarity of mind of where you want to go, And you have to create a safe space for people that they work and that they know what they want to do. They have their, call them KRAs or KPIs about what they need to do and what's expected of them, and appreciate them for what they do, and push them, because you don't want a lazy company. Be demanding, but also be fair at the same time. There's that fantastic French expression, I think, a main de fer et un gant de velours, which is like an iron hand with a velvet glove around it. If you set that up, and if you can work with people towards that common goal, and you get them aligned, in a way, somebody mentioned the other time to me, is as a good CEO, you want a diverse team, and then you want to be the best zookeeper in town to make sure that the lion doesn't eat the zebra, right? That's what you want to get to. But ultimately is how you form that team and how you get them, even if they have differences of opinion, to work together. That is key as the leader in that.
So let's, you already alluded to it. This is a nice seg into the other pillar of the generative leadership framework, which is who leaders are, or rather who they should be. And again, that pillar has three levels, and it starts with mind, and how leaders need to have a growth mindset versus more of a fixed mindset, trying to keep the status quo in place, which is very dangerous in the fast-changing world. Not a recipe for success. And then how you need to become authentic. Level 2, how you need to become authentic by expressing your vulnerability. To be real and be seen as real, so that you can connect with the people. And the third level is how do you then create an environment of psychological safety? And so that is mind, heart. Heart is the authenticity, the vulnerability, and gut. You feel that safety deep in your gut. So let's go and touch on each of those. And start with that mindset, with a growth mindset. I'm sure you've been thinking a lot about that over your 5 years.
Yeah, well, especially given our enormous growth, that was a constant. How do you do this, right? But the growth mindset is something that I think really needs to start from the leadership. Because it opens up things. I remember an interview many years ago with Richard Branson that impacted me, because he mentioned that whenever somebody came with a new idea, his first answer was always yes. And perhaps that's not always possible, but my experience is that in most of the cases it is. And as a leader, if you consistently say yes to new ideas and encourage people to do that, because of course, if somebody comes to you with an idea and you say no right from the start without really having looked at it and considered it, what's the chance that people come up with new ideas, right? It is a very easy thing to kill. So the growth mindset is almost at any point in time that people come to you with suggestions, start with a yes. Start with a yes and see what you can do with it. And maybe you have to alter it a bit. Maybe you have to change it a bit. But that growth mindset is something that is infectious in the organization. And a growth mindset makes people more optimistic very often. It's the bonus green and yellow heads, I guess. And people smile and they're happier, and they get more stuff done if they have that mindset. So to me, a growth organization always has a leg up on competition if they focus on it and if they're able to execute against that. But it does take an attitude. It is a spirit, and it's a trainable spirit. But it is a spirit that you can instill in yourself, and it's a spirit, I think, that you can instill in the management team and in the organization as a whole.
I love that. This is really wise, and it reminds, when I hear you talk, my mind goes to a sports coach. Right? I mean, we just saw the World Cup close to your home, and you see the best coaches. They do that, right? They have that mindset. They are pushing they are pushing everyone forward towards better performance, better results, and they lead by example. They create that kind of optimism, the kind of expectation, the kind of belief almost in a better future, and that lifts everyone up.
Well, and it's actually it leads to one of my quotes that I always like, is that where somebody said, he didn't know it couldn't be done, so he went out and did it.
Yeah.
It's
Good.
amazing that if you take the brakes of an organization, sometimes it feels that half the team sits with the foot on the gas and the other sits with the foot on the brake, and you gotta just sometimes hit the gas. And if you let people go and if you really get them engaged in it and they believe they can do it, it's amazing what they can do. And as you said, you see it in sports, you see it in teams, and you hear it from the top sales, the top guys in sports. They said, before I won the race, I had already seen myself winning it, right? And that's a
Yeah.
mental attitude. That's a mental envisioning where you need to go. And that's, I think, where that growth mindset and what you said earlier on about strategy, they go harm in harm together.
Yeah, they are. They are. It's also interesting because when I hear you talk, and you mentioned, take the brakes off. When I teach my executive MBA students, they're mostly mid career, right?
Hmm.
I mean, they so often say what you just said is like, I want to do so much more, but I'm stuck. I don't get
Yeah.
any support. There's no openness to my ideas. There's no people not using my potential, and that is just amazing when you think about that, right? There's so much potential in organizations, and leaders don't find a way to tap into it.
A huge untapped asset, absolutely.
Okay, wow, that was good. Then let's move into the second part, which is getting to authenticity and vulnerability, and that's a really, it's a really difficult area because at least my generation was growing up with those leaders that had all the answers. The leader was always right, the rest would follow. But we're seeing today that the world's so complex. I call it VUCA on steroids. Volatile,
Mm,
uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That was before COVID, and
yeah.
and now that we've taken that on steroids. It's the world's so unpredictable that leaders cannot have all the answers anymore. It's just too complex and a big all VUCA. So you need a different kind of leader that is much more engaging. Back to the point on engaging and empowering earlier on, and that requires you to become much more authentic by expressing your vulnerability, your fallibility as well, so that you lift your people up. How have you lived that?
Yeah, I think in that way the world is really upside down. I don't know if I'm of the same generation as you, John, but it is that world is upside down from where we were. It used to be certainly when I started out my career that information was power, and the power went up, or the information went up, and because of that, the smart guy on top made the decisions. Today, information is available everywhere. It's so democratized, if you will, and it's the opposite. The people in the field, the people that are working on the lines, the people that are doing the job are actually more informed, of course, than the leaders can be. And um, and one of the things that a lot of leaders, they float to the top, or they come to the top, or they deserve to be at the top because of their smartness and their decision making. But then all at once you get to a point where when you become in a larger organization the top guy, then what was your past success, which was taking information, making decisions, and putting it in place, is not applicable anymore. It's the opposite way around. It is now your task to get other people to do that. So what was your strong point is actually becomes your weak point, because if you keep doing that, you run into a wall. And that's where the authenticity part comes in, because leaders have been used to be the front man, the decision maker. Now they need to show their vulnerability, or they need to show, like, I don't know the answer, help me out here. But to do that in authentic way is not easy, and you can't fake authenticity, unless you have a real mental problem, I guess. But to be authentic is, and it's not easy for a leader, because within a short time period, you might have to take different stance, from being happy to sad to pushy to aggressive and friendly, because that can happen within half a day, right? You can hand out an award, you can have to let go of somebody, you might have to present the company to senior leadership, then you have to push a team because they missed their targets. And those are all different attitudes, but you have to do it in a genuine way so that you build a trust, so that people say, okay, I understand what he's doing, or I know that what he does is genuine. And that builds that authenticity. and then they believe you and they'll follow you. It's the old Gandalf rule that he said at one point in time: "I must follow them. I'm their leader." Right? And there is an element of giving the liberty and helping people to lead themselves, and you follow them, but you of course set the guidelines and the guardrails up on which direction you go and where you need to go do. And that is where you have to be authentic. You have to look people in the eye and talk to them, and be direct and honest with them.
Yeah, I've seen this go spot on. I've seen this go wrong so often where you get somebody who gets to a certain position, and because you've done things right in the past, and then you feel so powerful that you're then going to tell everybody what they need to do because of what you've done to get to that position. But
Right.
the world's moved on, and you become a relic of the past, and not produce results. I love the way that you mentioned that. It's also, and you said that earlier in our pre-call as well. It's also a thing of leaders to know when to move on, and not stay too long, because they get stale sometimes. You have successes for 3, 5, 7 years, and then suddenly it dries up. You see that again in sports, coaches of sports teams, as
Yeah.
well. And you made that point on your career, as well. You want to say a few more words on how you've approached that at Might Buy?
Well, yeah. I joined the company when it was when it was in second or third year of operation. I left in about its 10th years of operation, and there was a lot of contribution that I could bring because I had worked in larger organizations, so I knew what that would look like. But then also I decided that as the organization needs to go into a next phase, I didn't want to stick around to be like the boxer, that tries to win one more title fight and gets beat up. There's then time to let the organization reinvent itself. And many organizations, you see CEOs, they roll out, I guess, after about 3 years. Okay, I did a bit longer than that. But I think it's important. It's also make sure that that organization doesn't get stale, and that a new person will bring in new views. If a previous guy was a marketeer, then the new guy might be operations, and the next person might be a supply chain person, and then you have a media person. I think that's healthy for an organization. It keeps people alive. It keeps people on their edge, because after a while they know what you expect, and it becomes tougher and tougher to guide, I think. Um,
And it keeps you happy yourself as well, right? Because you leave at the top,
oh,
and move on to new frontiers in life, like you are doing today. So
Absolutely, and
exciting.
then you can give things back, and you get into more advisory roles, and maybe touch more companies, and be guest speakers, and help out where you can. And that's certainly from my perspective where I'm standing right now. And in a way, it's what you're doing, have you done in your career with Sean. It's something that I think works out very nice if you have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, to podcast at the conference board,
Yeah,
and do much more,
there
by
you
the
go.
way. All right, we talked mind, we talked heart, and we are getting to the end of our conversation by talking a bit about that gut, and then that's very popular term right now, psychological safety,
Mm.
which ultimately which is a dimension at an organizational level that allows trust to be built at individual levels, right?
Yeah.
So indeed, a very powerful theme for companies today. How have you approached this?
Yeah, I think trust is built over a time period, and it can be broken very quickly. Um, and it is something that you have to, as they say, you have to walk the talk, right? And that means very often that you vote with your feet. You go there, you go take a look on the specific spot. And nowadays with COVID, you might not physically go there every time, but I think that to be there, I think it was in the book Fish, they say be there, right? Which means be in the moment and be 100% there. So when you're talking to people, that phone is away, then you're listening to them. And that physical embodiment for me of authenticity is walking around. And I'd love to always go into the factory, right? invariably, when you walk through the factory or when you go to see a customer, you learn things when you're in the field. And that's where the the sincerity comes over again, where people see what you do, and whatever you do as a leader, it is going to be observed. So I sometimes hear leaders say, "Oh, my door is always open," and I can't help thinking, well, if your door is open, why don't you walk through it and go out? Because your operator is not going to walk into your CEO office, right? Your customer is not going to walk into your door unless he's got a big problem. If your door is open, get out of there and walk the talk, show how it's done, be a the physical embodiment of that leadership, because what you do, how you talk to operators, how you talk to your sales team, how you talk to your managers, that is, and how you coach them, how you do the curbside talk, that is what really gets the point across. That's where people see, darn, this person actually, he believes in what he says. He believes in what he does. He doesn't only just claim it. He actually does it. He's authentic. He wants to this growth mindset, and that's when people follow. So that is to me such an important part, that walk in the talk, to being seen to not only just preach it, but to put it in place. And in My Dubai, what we created, we actually, as one of our value statements, was to provide a nurturing workplace. And that meant that people knew that they were to be nurtured, or they were an asset, and they needed to be better at the end of the year than in the beginning of the year. So every new employee would actually see me as a CEO, because once in a month or once every 2 months, all the newbies would be in a room and they would have a presentation of the organization, and I'd go there and I'd ask them and I'd tell them that I wanted them to be stronger at the end of the year than in the beginning of the year. And I would ask if they had questions. And very seldom did they have questions. But the mere fact that you walk up to them and say, if you have a question, this is your opportunity, ask me. That gives a certain amount of empowerment, or a feeling that if he's actually here, that means that he probably cares. And that is such a powerful tool. And that's why I say walk the talk, go there. You can make a statement on the wall that says, well, if you have a question, let us know. Or you can actually go there and talk to people. And that's when people say, okay, we know what we're doing here. They drink the Kool-Aid and they start behaving that way as well. The managers will do, and the in-between managers and the mid-managers and everybody else in the organization.
I love that, and so it's interesting because while you talked, I was in my mind thinking the word that you haven't used is care, showing that you care. But then at the end of your long speech here, you actually mentioned that word.
Yeah.
It's about showing that you care. By the way, I love the values of establishing a nurturing workplace. Right? I think it was
Yeah.
that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
That's a really strong value, which for our audience, I would consider. Are you doing enough of that? Okay, well, that's great. We have gone full circle around the three things that leaders do: envisioning, enabling to execute, and engaging and empowering, and also how leaders should act and be, and what their character needs to be, and how they express themselves through their growth mindsets, their authenticity and vulnerability, and their creating the psychological safety and walking the talk. That's fantastic. Now, with that, and you and I agreed this, right? So it wasn't like me deciding this, but still, it was my framework. So let me allow you to finish this conversation by making, maybe one or maximum 2 points that we haven't touched on that you feel that you wanted to get across to our audience.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's the tension between doing and being. That's always an important one, right? It's the old statement about do as I say, don't do as I do. But I think you have to be very careful of that. I think as a leader, you need to make sure that you behave the way what you ask people to do. And with that growth mindset, one of the things that I always like to do is challenge the team and reflect and say, guys, what is the next best alternative? That's very often the question that I would ask them. And it's important, because the next best alternative does two things. Number one, it doesn't get you into that still fixed idea that you mentioned before. That's always a risk. And number two, it also means that your team does not just pick one thought, but they actually say, okay, how can I do this different? and it avoids that tunnel vision. And it creates a fantastic opportunity, because when you say, what's the next best alternative, they come up with an alternative. And then if you like that alternative more, you coach them towards that. So it is a wonderful way of letting the team come up with good solutions. So I think that's one element about being and doing. It's a very simple trick. What's the next best alternative? But it also shows you that you value their views. And I think maybe one last one that I'm keenly aware of is that what you do as a leader is of enormous importance. Where you put your focus, what you pay attention to is what gets done. If you focus on safety, the team will. If you focus on customers, your organization will. And that is something that is extremely important. And you have to be consistent with that message. It shouldn't be the flavor of the month. As a matter of fact, the one thing that I've learned, I guess, is that by the time you get sick of the message yourself is probably when your organization starts to understand what you really mean, because it goes around to your mind all the time with every single manager that you talk to, but each one of them only gets a small exposure of that. So, stick to your priorities, stick to what you believe is important, and keep hammering that into the organization. Keep communicating, keep engaging people, keep asking people on that same message over and again. And I think that will be appreciated. People will then feel that they're in a safe area, that they know what can be expected of you. And that comes back to that being that person that is asking people to do things, and they will follow at that point in time.
Living your values, if I recap, living your values, express your priorities, define your expectations, and then create that safe space for people to get engaged and teams to be empowered, and unleash the organization.
It's a perfect summary.
Alexander van Riet, I just want to thank you so much for this very stimulating conversation, very stimulating and insightful conversation. I think the framing worked. Would have probably worked without the framing, but anyway, we got through it with a bunch of tangible insights. Thank you so much for investing your time and sharing that with our audience. And I want to wish you all success in that great and brave decision that you made to get into a new career. And compliments again on what you've achieved in your role at My Dubai. Indeed, I did notice it was part of Emirates when I flew back from Dubai last January. So I was impressed.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Well, thank you for the invite. It was much appreciated, and it was wonderful to actually have the discussion to kind of see how things all fit together. So yeah, appreciate it. Anytime. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, John.
Wonderful. Thank you. To our audience, if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our Insights podcast series or explore the entire catalog of the many podcast programs we have at the Conference Board. You can visit our website, the Conference Board, or you can follow us at tcb.org/podcasts. Thank you again. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Derek, for support. And thank you, audience, for listening. Hope you found this insightful. Give us feedback. See you next time. No, hear you next time. Bye.
This has been Insights from the Conference Board.